76-year-old black woman walked into a mobile, Alabama grocery store to buy bread and oatmeal. But what came out of her handbag shocked an entire city. What started as routine shopping turned into public humiliation when a security guard dumped her belongings on the floor. Hidden inside was a U.S. Marine Corps dress uniform with a bronze star, belonging to Alabama's first black female gunnery sergeant. Have you ever been judged by your appearance before anyone knew your story? Have you ever witnessed someone being mistreated in public and wondered if you should speak up? Today's story exposes how quickly we judge and how wrong we can be. What would you do if you discover the person being humiliated was a war hero? Stay with me, because this story will change how you see the elderly person next to you in line. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. It was 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon when Miss Loretta Jenkins pushed through the glass doors of Savamar grocery store. The automatic doors whooshed open, letting in the humid Alabama heat that clung to her floral print dress. She carried her worn leather handbag close to her chest, the way she'd done for 30 years of shopping at this same store. Miss Loretta moved slowly down the produce section, her weathered hands selecting 2 loaves of wheat bread and a container of oatmeal. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just enough groceries for the week ahead. She didn't notice the young white cashier watching her from register 3. Brittany Matthews, 19 years old with bleached blonde hair and a nose ring, leaned over to whisper something to Marcus Williams, the store's security guard. Marcus was a big man, 6'2", with arms that stretched his uniform shirt tight across his chest. He wore his badge like it meant something important. "That old lady's been walking around for 20 minutes, Brittany said, her voice low but sharp. "She keeps looking around all nervous like. I bet she's got something in that bag." Marcus glanced toward Miss Loretta, who was now standing in the cereal aisle, comparing prices on 2 boxes of cornflakes. To him, she looked like trouble. Old people sometimes stole things, he told himself, especially when they thought nobody was watching. "You want to check her out?" Marcus asked. "Yeah, definitely. Better safe than sorry, right?" Miss Loretta had no idea what was coming. She'd been shopping at Savamart since 1995, back when it was called Thompson's Market. She knew every aisle, every sale day, every cashier who'd worked there longer than 6 months. Today felt like every other Tuesday. But when she turned the corner toward the checkout lanes, Marcus was waiting. "Ma'am," he said, his voice loud enough for half the store to hear. "We need to check your bag." Miss Loretta stopped walking. Her dark eyes met his, and for a moment, something passed between them. Not fear. Miss Loretta had seen worse than security guards, but surprise. In 30 years of shopping here, nobody had ever questioned her about anything. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "Your bag, ma'am. Store policy. We need to check it." By now, other customers had started to notice. A woman with 2 small children stopped her cart to stare. A teenage boy pulled out his phone. An elderly white man in a Vietnam veteran's cap shook his head, but kept walking. "I haven't bought anything yet," Miss Loretta said, her voice still calm. "I was just looking at cereal." "That's exactly why we need to check," Marcus said, reaching for her handbag. "You've been walking around a long time." Miss Loretta pulled the bag closer to her chest. "Young man, I've been shopping here since before you were born. I've never stolen anything in my life." But Marcus wasn't listening. He was thinking about how Brittany would react if he didn't follow through, how his supervisor would respond if someone complained later, how he needed to look tough in front of the growing crowd. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to hand over that bag, or I'm calling the police." The words hung in the air like smoke. Miss Loretta looked around at the faces staring back at her. Some looked curious. Others looked uncomfortable. A few looked like they were enjoying the show. She'd been here before. Not in this store, but in this moment. The moment when someone decided she was guilty of something she hadn't done. The moment when her dignity became public entertainment. "Fine," she said, extending her handbag toward Marcus. "But please be careful." Marcus took the bag and immediately began dumping its contents onto the cold floor. Out came tissues, folded and refolded. A small leather Bible with pages soft from decades of reading. a handful of coins that scattered and rolled under the nearby candy display. Customers pressed closer, their phones now recording everything. Miss Loretta stood perfectly still, watching her personal belongings spread across the linoleum like evidence in a crime scene. Then Marcus felt something else, something heavy, wrapped in cloth at the bottom of the bag. His hands began to shake as he reached for it, though he didn't know why. Marcus lifted the cloth bundle from Miss Loretta's handbag like it might explode. The fabric was soft, worn smooth by years of careful folding and unfolding. Whatever was inside had weight to it, substance that made his confident swagger suddenly feel shaky. "What's this?" he asked, holding it up for everyone to see. Miss Loretta's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Please be careful with that." The tone in her voice made some customers step back, not because she sounded angry, but because she sounded heartbroken. Like someone was about to break something precious that couldn't be replaced. Brittany had moved closer now, her phone out and recording. "Open it," she said to Marcus, loud enough for her video to pick up the sound. "Let's see what she's really hiding." Marcus began unwrapping the bundle. The first layer was soft cotton, faded blue and clean. Beneath that, more fabric, this time with brass buttons that caught the store's harsh lighting. Then something metallic that made a soft clinking sound. "Holy," Marcus started to say, then stopped himself, because what he was holding wasn't stolen merchandise. It wasn't drugs or weapons or anything that belonged in a security guard's report. It was a military uniform, a real one, with insignia and ribbons and a shine to the brass that only came from years of proper care. The crowd went dead silent. Even the store's background music seemed to fade away. Miss Loretta stood there watching as Marcus held her Marine Corps dress uniform up to the light. The same uniform she'd worn to her graduation from boot camp in 1969. The same uniform she'd worn when she received her Bronze Star for service in Vietnam. The same uniform she'd kept pristine for 55 years, even though she'd never worn it in public since the day she came home. "Anyone can buy a uniform online these days," Marcus said, but his voice cracked when he said it. Because this wasn't some Halloween costume or surplus store purchase. This was the real thing, and everyone in the store could tell. Brittany's smile disappeared. "She probably stole it from some old veteran's house," she said, but nobody was laughing anymore. Miss Loretta reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a small photograph. Black and white, edges worn soft from handling. She held it up without saying a word. The photo showed a young black woman in marine blues, standing at attention, saluting the American flag. The woman's face was serious, proud, an unmistakably younger version of Miss Loretta Jenkins. Marcus dropped the uniform like it was on fire. The photograph trembled in Miss Loretta's weathered hands, but her voice stayed steady when she finally spoke. "That's me," she said simply. 1969, Camp Pendleton, California. The store manager, David Chun, had arrived during the commotion. He stood at the edge of the crowd, trying to process what he was seeing. A military uniform spread across his store floor, a Bronze Star medal gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and an elderly black woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Ma'am," David said, stepping forward, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Miss Loretta looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "There's been no misunderstanding, son. Your employee thought I was a thief. Now he knows better." But the crowd wanted to know more. How does a 76-year-old woman carrying groceries end up with a military uniform that looked like it belonged in a museum? The answer started 56 years ago, when Loretta Jenkins was 22 years old and tired of being told what she couldn't do. Back then, Mobile, Alabama wasn't the kind of place where young black women talked about joining the military. Most folks expected her to find work cleaning houses or watching other people's children. Maybe get married to a good man and raise a family. Stay quiet, stay safe, stay in her place. But Loretta had other plans. She'd grown up watching her father work 3 jobs to keep food on the table. She'd seen her mother take care of 5 children while cleaning offices downtown at night. She'd watched her older brother get drafted into Vietnam and come home different, angry, broken in ways that didn't show on the outside. When a Marine Corps recruiter came to Mobile State College in 1968, most students walked right past his table. But Loretta stopped. She picked up the pamphlets, asked questions, and listened to his stories about serving your country with honor. "You sure about this, young lady?" the recruiter had asked. "Military life ain't easy for anyone, especially not for what?" Loretta had interrupted. "For someone who looks like me." The recruiter, a white man from Georgia with tobacco stains on his teeth, had nodded. "I'm just being honest with you. You're gonna face things that ain't fair. You're gonna be the only one who looks like you in most rooms you walk into." "I'm already the only one who looks like me in most rooms I walk into," Loretta had said. "At least in the Marines, I'll be serving my country while I'm at it." Boot camp was everything the recruiter had warned her about, and worse. She was one of only 3 black women in her entire training class. The others quit before graduation. Loretta stayed, even when drill instructors called her names that made her want to cry. Even when other recruits refused to speak to her. Even when she had to prove herself twice as hard as everyone else just to be considered half as good. She earned her stripes through determination that impressed even the toughest sergeants. She qualified as a sharpshooter on a rifle range. She graduated 3rd in her class from advanced training. And when orders came down for Vietnam, she volunteered. Why? Her commanding officer had asked. You could request stateside duty. Nobody would blame you. Because that's not what Marines do, Loretta had answered. We go where we're needed. Vietnam changed her. Not in the broken way it had changed her brother, but in a way that made her understand what service really meant. She saved lives during a rocket attack on her base. She helped evacuate wounded soldiers under enemy fire. She did her job with the kind of courage that earns Bronze Stars and the respect of men who'd never respected anyone who looked like her. When she came home to Alabama in 1972, she expected things to be different. She expected people to see the uniform and understand what it meant. She expected honor, respect, recognition. Instead, she found a world that had barely changed at all. Marcus Williams stood in the middle of Savamart, staring at a Bronze Star medal that cost more than his monthly salary, and felt his whole world turn upside down. The confident security guard who'd been ready to call the police 5 minutes ago now looked like he wanted to crawl under the checkout counter and disappear. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. Not in front of all these people. Not in front of Brittany, who was still recording everything on her phone. Not in front of David Chun, who was looking at him like he'd just made the biggest mistake of his career. Look, Marcus said, his voice getting defensive. I was just doing my job. She was acting suspicious, walking around for 20 minutes without buying anything. How was I supposed to know she had all this military stuff? Miss Loretta bent down and began carefully folding her uniform back into its protective cloth. Each movement was deliberate, respectful, like she was handling something holy. You weren't supposed to know, she said quietly. You were supposed to treat me like a human being. I did treat you like a human being, Marcus shot back. I treated you like I'd treat anyone else who was acting suspicious. No, said a voice from the crowd. You treated her like a criminal. The voice belonged to Robert Mitchell, an 82-year-old white man wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap and a Desert Storm t-shirt. He'd been watching the whole scene unfold from the greeting card aisle, and he'd seen enough. You dumped her personal belongings on the floor like she was garbage, Robert continued, stepping closer. You humiliated her in front of everyone in this store. And for what? Because she was taking her time shopping? Brittany finally spoke up, her voice shrill with panic. We didn't know. How are we supposed to know she was in the military? She looks like any other old lady. The words hung in the air like a slap. Several customers gasped. Others shook their heads in disgust. Miss Loretta looked up from her folding, her dark eyes meeting Brittany's for the first time since this whole mess started. Any other old lady? Miss Loretta repeated. I didn't mean it like that, Brittany said quickly, but everyone could hear the lie in her voice. David Chun had heard enough. As store manager, he knew this situation was about to become a public relations nightmare. The videos people were taking would be online within hours. Corporate would be asking questions. Lawyers might get involved. Ma'am, he said to Miss Loretta, I am so sorry about this. Please, let me offer you a gift card for your trouble. Maybe $50 to cover your groceries today. Miss Loretta stood up, her handbag clutched against her chest. her uniform safely tucked away. She looked at David Chun like he'd just offered her 30 pieces of silver. "A gift card," she said. That's when the crowd realized this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Miss Loretta Jenkins had been disrespected before. She'd been called names, ignored, dismissed, and treated like she didn't matter. But standing in the middle of Savamart with her military uniform tucked back in her handbag and a store manager offering her $50 like she was some kind of charity case, something inside her finally snapped. Not in an angry way, not in a way that would give Marcus or Brittany or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing her lose control, but in a way that made her remember exactly who she was and what she fought for, and why she kept that uniform folded perfectly in her handbag for all these years. "A gift card," she repeated, her voice carrying across the store like a bell. "You think $50 makes up for what just happened here?" David Chun shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to make this right. What would you like me to do?" "I'd like you to do what you should have done from the beginning," Miss Loretta said. "I'd like you to treat me with the respect I've earned. I'd like you to recognize that I'm a customer who's been shopping here for 30 years. I'd like you to understand that I'm a veteran who served this country with honor." She paused, looking around at the faces staring back at her. Some looked ashamed, others looked curious. A few looked like they were finally beginning to understand. "But most of all," she continued, "I'd like you to explain to me why your employees thought it was acceptable to humiliate me in front of all these people based on nothing more than the color of my skin and my age." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the store's background music seemed to have stopped. Robert Mitchell, the Vietnam veteran, stepped forward. "Ma'am, what unit were you with?" "3rd Marine Aircraft Wing," Miss Loretta answered. "Daneg, 1970 to 1972. Robert's eyes widened. "I was with the Army, same time, same place. Different base, but we worked together sometimes. You folks saved our butts more than once." "We did our job," Miss Loretta said simply. "Yes, you did, and you did it better than most." Robert turned to face the crowd. This woman served in Vietnam when it wasn't popular. She served as a black woman in a white man's military. She served during a time when people like her weren't even welcome in some of the places they were fighting to protect. More veterans in the crowd began to identify themselves. A middle-aged woman who'd served in Desert Storm, a young man back from Afghanistan, an elderly Navy veteran who'd been at Pearl Harbor. One by one, they surrounded Miss Loretta, not to protect her. She'd proven she could handle herself, but to stand with her, to show Marcus and Brittany and David Chun and everyone else in that store that they weren't just dealing with some random old lady. They were dealing with someone who'd earned the right to be treated with dignity. And that's when Miss Loretta made the request that changed everything. Miss Loretta looked around at the circle of veterans who had stepped forward to support her. Their faces showed something she hadn't seen in years: genuine respect. Not pity, not charity, but the kind of respect that one soldier gives another. "I have a simple request," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I want to speak to your corporate office. I want to file a formal complaint, and I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else." David Chin's face went pale. Corporate complaints meant investigations. Investigations meant his job could be on the line. "Ma'am, I'm sure we can work this out right here, right now. What if I made it a $100 gift card?" "You're not listening," said Robert Mitchell, the Vietnam veteran. "She doesn't want your money. She wants justice." That's when someone unexpected spoke up. Jennifer Martinez, a young Savamart employee who'd been watching from the customer service desk, stepped forward. She was 23, had worked at the store for 2 years, and had seen Marcus and Brittany treat other customers badly before. "Ma'am," Jennifer said, her voice shaking slightly, "I want you to know that what happened to you wasn't right. And it wasn't the first time." David Chun shot her a warning look. "Jennifer, you need to get back to your station." But Jennifer kept talking. "Last month, Marcus followed a Hispanic family around the store for 20 minutes. 2 weeks ago, Brittany called the police on a teenager who was just looking at candy. They do this stuff all the time, and nobody ever stops them." The crowd murmured angrily. Several customers pulled out their phones to record Jennifer's testimony. Miss Loretta listened carefully, filing away every word. "Are you willing to put that in writing?" Miss Loretta asked. Jennifer nodded, despite David's glare. "Yes, ma'am. I'll write down everything I've seen." Marcus tried to defend himself. "She's lying. I was just doing my job. You can't believe some minimum wage employee over a trained security professional." "Trained security professional?" Robert Mitchell laughed bitterly. "Son, I've seen trained professionals in action. What you did today was amateur hour." Another veteran, Maria Santos, who'd served in Desert Storm, spoke up. "In the military, we have a saying, honor, courage, commitment. You showed none of those things today." "This is ridiculous," Brittany said, her voice getting higher. "We're the ones being attacked here. We were just trying to protect the store." "Protect it from what?" asked an elderly black woman who'd been shopping with her granddaughter. "From a 76-year-old woman buying oatmeal." The crowd was growing larger. Other customers had stopped their shopping to watch the confrontation. Store employees were gathering too, some looking uncomfortable, others openly supporting Jennifer's decision to speak up. Miss Loretta watched it all with the calm patience of someone who'd seen battles before. She knew that real change didn't happen in moments of anger. It happened when people stood together and demanded better. "Mr. Chun," she said, turning back to the store manager, "I'm going to give you one more chance to do the right thing. Call your corporate office. Get someone down here with real authority. Because this conversation isn't over." David Chun realized he was trapped. The videos were already online. The story was spreading, and Miss Loretta Jenkins wasn't going anywhere. David Chun disappeared into his office to make the phone call that would change everything. While he was gone, Miss Loretta did something that surprised everyone in the store. She sat down, right there in the middle of the main aisle. She pulled over a plastic chair from the store's small cafe area and sat down like she was settling in for a long wait. Her handbag rested in her lap, her uniform still safely tucked inside. "Ma'am, you can't sit there," Marcus said, his voice desperate. "You're blocking the aisle." "I'm not blocking anything," Miss Loretta replied calmly. "I'm exercising my right as a customer to wait for proper service." Robert Mitchell grinned and pulled over another chair. "Mind if I join you?" Soon, half a dozen veterans were sitting in the aisle with Miss Loretta. Jennifer Martinez brought them cups of water from the customer service desk. Other customers began taking photos and videos, not of the confrontation now, but of the peaceful protest happening right in the middle of Savamart. That's when the first news crew arrived. Channel 7 News had picked up the story from social media. The reporter, a young woman named Ashley Kim, pushed through the crowd with her cameraman right behind her. "Ma'am," Ashley said, approaching Miss Loretta. "I'm Ashley Kim from Channel 7. Would you be willing to tell our viewers what happened here today?" Miss Loretta looked up at the camera, her dark eyes clear and strong. "My name is Loretta Jenkins. I'm 76 years old, and I've been shopping at this store for 30 years. Today, I was accused of being a thief because I took too long to decide between 2 boxes of cereal." She paused, letting that sink in. "I served this country for 4 years in the United States Marine Corps. I fought in Vietnam. I earned a Bronze Star for valor. I came home to Alabama and worked as a school custodian for 35 years, cleaning classrooms and helping raise other people's children." Her voice never wavered, never got angry, never showed the hurt that everyone knew she must be feeling. "I've never stolen anything in my life. I've never been arrested. I've never even gotten a speeding ticket. But today, these employees decided I was a criminal based on nothing more than how I look and how old I am." The camera captured every word. By the time Miss Loretta finished speaking, her impromptu interview had been shared on social media dozens of times. David Chun returned from his office looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Ma'am, I spoke to corporate. They're sending someone down from Birmingham. They'll be here in 2 hours." "Good," Miss Loretta said, not getting up from her chair. "We'll wait." "You can't just sit here for 2 hours," Marcus protested. "This is disrupting business." "Business?" Robert Mitchell laughed. "Son, you disrupted business the moment you decided to humiliate a war hero in front of half the city." More customers had gathered now. Some were shopping, but most were there to support Miss Loretta. Someone had brought her a sandwich from the deli. Another person offered her a pillow for her chair. The peaceful protest was growing into something bigger, something that would make Savamart Corporate realize they weren't just dealing with one upset customer. They were dealing with a community that had finally had enough. By 4:30 p.m., the story had exploded across social media. The hashtag Miss Loretta was trending in Alabama. The video of her interview had been shared over 1,000 times. And Savamart's corporate headquarters was dealing with its worst public relations crisis in company history. But the real impact was happening right there in the store. Customers weren't just shopping anymore. They were coming specifically to support Miss Loretta. The parking lot was packed. The cafe area had been turned into an impromptu community gathering space. Local veterans organizations had sent representatives. Civil rights groups were arriving with signs and banners. Marcus Williams and Brittany Matthews were nowhere to be seen. David Chun had sent them home, pending investigation, which everyone knew meant they were probably going to be fired. Jennifer Martinez had been joined by 3 other employees who came forward with their own stories about discrimination at the store. They sat with Miss Loretta, sharing incidents they'd witnessed, customers they'd seen mistreated, complaints they'd filed that had been ignored. "This has been going on for years," said Tommy Washington, a stock clerk who'd worked at Savamart for 5 years. "Management always said they'd look into it, but nothing ever changed." The local NAACP chapter arrived with their president, a stern-faced woman named Dr. Patricia Williams. She sat down with Miss Loretta and listened as she told her story again, this time with the careful attention of someone who'd fought these battles before. "Miss Jenkins," Dr. Williams said, "this isn't just about you anymore. This is about every elderly person, every minority, every veteran who's been treated like garbage in stores across this country." "I know," Miss Loretta said quietly. "That's why I'm not leaving." Channel 7 News had been joined by reporters from 3 other stations. National news outlets were starting to pick up the story. Savamart's stock price was already dropping as investors worried about the growing controversy. At 5:15 p.m., a black sedan pulled into the parking lot. 3 people in expensive suits got out, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. The corporate executives had arrived. David Chun met them at the door, his face sweating despite the air conditioning. He led them toward the crowd gathered around Miss Loretta, who was still sitting calmly in her plastic chair, her handbag in her lap, surrounded by veterans and supporters. "Ma'am," the lead executive said, extending his hand. "I'm Richard Hayes, Regional Vice President for Savamart. I understand there's been a misunderstanding." Miss Loretta looked up at him with the same calm expression she'd worn all day. "There's been no misunderstanding, Mr. Hayes. Your employees discriminated against me. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The confrontation everyone had been waiting for was about to begin. Richard Hayes was a corporate executive who'd handled dozens of customer complaints over his 20-year career. He knew how to smooth over problems, offer compensation, and make bad publicity disappear. But as he stood in the middle of Savamart, looking down at Miss Loretta Jenkins, he realized this wasn't going to be like any complaint he'd handled before. "Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice carefully modulated to sound sincere. "On behalf of Savamart Corporation, I want to apologize for what happened today. We've already begun an investigation, and I can assure you that any employees who acted inappropriately will face consequences." Miss Loretta didn't stand up. She didn't smile. She didn't look impressed by his expensive suit or his corporate title. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I appreciate your apology, but I don't think you understand what really happened here today." "I believe I do," Hayes replied. "There was a misunderstanding about store security procedures." "No," Miss Loretta interrupted, her voice cutting through his corporate speak like a knife. "What happened here today was discrimination, pure and simple. Your employees saw an elderly black woman and decided she was a criminal. They humiliated me in front of dozens of people. They scattered my personal belongings on the floor like garbage. And they did it because they thought I was someone who didn't matter." The crowd had grown quiet, listening to every word. News cameras captured the exchange. Hayes realized that whatever he said next would be broadcast across the state within hours. "Miss Jenkins, I understand you're upset." "I'm not upset, Mr. Hayes. I'm done." Miss Loretta reached into her handbag and pulled out a folder that nobody had noticed before. "I've been keeping records." She opened the folder to reveal newspaper clippings, printed emails, and handwritten notes. These are stories about discrimination at Savamart locations across Alabama. Birmingham, Montgomery, Huntsville. Same pattern, same problems, same excuses from corporate. Hayes's face went pale. "Ma'am, I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." Miss Loretta pulled out a letter dated 6 months earlier. "This is a complaint filed by the family of Samuel Rodriguez, an 82-year-old veteran who was accused of shoplifting at your Montgomery location. Want to know what your company's response was?" She read from the letter. "Savamart Corporation has reviewed your complaint and found no evidence of wrongdoing. We consider this matter closed." The crowd murmured angrily. Hayes looked around at the faces staring back at him, realizing that this wasn't just about today's incident. This was about a pattern of behavior that had been building for years. "Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice less confident now, "I wasn't aware of the Montgomery situation." "Of course you weren't," Miss Loretta said, "because your company doesn't care about people like me. You don't care about elderly customers or minority customers or anyone who can't afford expensive lawyers. You just care about profit." Dr. Patricia Williams from the NAACP stepped forward. "Mr. Hayes, we've been documenting incidents like this for 3 years. We've sent letters to your corporate office. We've requested meetings. We've been ignored every time. Until today," Miss Loretta said, standing up for the first time in over an hour. "Today, you can't ignore us. Today, the whole world is watching. And today, I'm not accepting your apology or your gift cards or your promises to do better." Hayes looked desperate. "What do you want?" Miss Loretta smiled for the first time all day. "I want real change, and I want it in writing." The crowd pressed closer as Miss Loretta Jenkins faced down the Savamart corporate executives. This wasn't just about one woman's humiliation anymore. This was about justice, dignity, and whether a major corporation would finally be held accountable for years of discrimination. "Real change," Richard Hayes repeated, his voice careful. "Miss Jenkins, what exactly are you asking for?" Miss Loretta had been thinking about this moment for hours. She'd watched the crowd grow, listened to other victims' stories, and realized that this was bigger than just her own experience. "First," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I want a public apology. Not just to me, but to every customer who's been mistreated at your stores. And I want it published in every newspaper in Alabama." Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I can certainly arrange for a public apology." "Second," Miss Loretta continued, "I want mandatory training for every employee in every Savamart location. Real training, not some online video that people can skip through. Training about respect, about dignity, about how to treat customers like human beings." That's a significant undertaking," Hayes said. "Third, I want an independent committee to review complaints. Not your corporate lawyers, not your PR department. Real people from the community who can investigate when customers are mistreated." Dr. Patricia Williams nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what we've been asking for." "And fourth," Miss Loretta said, her voice growing stronger, "I want you to establish a scholarship fund for veterans' families. A real fund with real money that helps people who've served this country get the education they deserve." Hayes looked around at his fellow executives, clearly out of his depth. "Miss Jenkins, these are major policy changes. I don't have the authority to make those kinds of decisions." "Then find someone who does," Miss Loretta said simply. The crowd erupted in applause. News cameras captured every moment. Social media was exploding with support for Miss Loretta's demands. "Ma'am," Hayes said, pulling out his phone, "I need to call our CEO. This is going to take some time." "I have time," Miss Loretta said, settling back in her chair. "I've got all the time in the world." While Hayes made his phone calls, something remarkable happened. The impromptu protest had turned into a community celebration. Local restaurants sent free food. Churches organized prayer circles. Veterans groups set up information tables. Miss Loretta found herself surrounded by people she'd never met, but who felt like family. They shared stories of their own experiences with discrimination. They talked about their military service, their struggles, their hopes for the future. You know what the hardest part is? Asked Maria Santos, the Desert Storm veteran. It's not the discrimination itself. It's the way people act like it's not happening, like we're making it up, or like we should just accept it, added Robert Mitchell. Like we should be grateful for basic human decency. Miss Loretta nodded. That's exactly why I'm not backing down. I'm tired of being grateful for the bare minimum. At 7:30 p.m., Hayes returned with his phone pressed to his ear. He was talking to someone in rapid, urgent tones. Finally, he hung up and approached Miss Loretta. Miss Jenkins, he said, I've just spoken with our CEO. He's flying down from Atlanta tonight. He wants to meet with you personally. Good, Miss Loretta said, but I'm not meeting with him alone. I want Dr. Williams there. I want Robert and Maria and Jennifer and all the other people who've been affected by this. Hayes nodded reluctantly. I'll arrange it. And Mr. Hayes, Miss Loretta added, tell your CEO that this isn't a negotiation. These are the terms. Take them or leave them. For the first time all day, Hayes looked genuinely scared. 3 weeks after the Savamart incident, Mobile, Alabama looked like a different city. The video of Miss Loretta's humiliation had gone viral, racking up over 2 million views in the first week alone. But it wasn't just the shame that spread across social media. It was the outrage. Marcus Williams cleaned out his locker on a Thursday morning, his security guard uniform folded neatly in a cardboard box. Savamart's corporate office had made their decision swift and final. Zero tolerance for discrimination meant zero tolerance, period. This ain't fair, he muttered to himself, but nobody was listening anymore. The other employees avoided eye contact as he walked past. Even his supervisor, who'd hired him 2 years ago, couldn't bring himself to shake hands goodbye. Brittany Matthews had lasted exactly 4 days after the video went viral. Her TikTok account, which she'd used to mock Miss Loretta during the incident, had been flooded with angry comments. Her phone number got leaked somehow, and the calls never stopped. Death threats, angry veterans, disappointed parents. Everyone had something to say about the 19-year-old who'd laughed while an elderly war hero's belongings were scattered across a grocery store floor. I didn't know, she kept telling reporters who camped outside her apartment. How was I supposed to know she was a veteran? But the question everyone kept asking was simple. Why did it matter? Why should Miss Loretta have needed to prove her worth to buy bread and oatmeal? David Chun, the store manager, had survived the corporate purge, but barely. He'd spent the last 3 weeks in sensitivity training, diversity workshops, and crisis management meetings. Savamart stock had dropped 12% the day after the video went viral. The company's CEO had issued 3 separate apologies, each one more desperate than the last. We're implementing new policies, David explained to the local news crew that seemed to live in his parking lot now. Mandatory bias training for all employees, community outreach programs, a veterans appreciation discount program. But Miss Loretta wasn't impressed by corporate promises. She'd spent the last 3 weeks doing something she'd never done before, talking to reporters. The shy, quiet woman who kept her military service private for 50 years suddenly found herself on every major news network in the country. This isn't about me, she told CNN. This is about how we treat people who look like me, who are my age, who don't fit into neat little boxes that make other people comfortable. Her words hit different because she didn't sound angry. She sounded tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being dismissed. Tired of carrying the weight of other people's assumptions. The support had been overwhelming. Veterans organizations from across the country sent letters, flowers, and donations. The Bronze Star Foundation offered to feature her story in their next museum exhibit. 3 different publishers wanted to turn her story into a book. But Miss Loretta had bigger plans. Plans that would change Mobile forever. The Mobile City Council chamber had never seen anything like it. Every seat was filled with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. Veterans in uniform, community leaders, church groups, and regular citizens who'd been moved by Miss Loretta's story. They'd all come to witness history in the making. Miss Loretta sat at the front table, wearing a simple blue dress and her bronze star pinned to her chest. She'd never worn the medal in public before, but today felt different. Today, She wasn't hiding anymore. The chair recognizes Miss Loretta Jenkins, announced Mayor Patricia Williams, a black woman in her 50s who'd grown up hearing stories about the mysterious veteran who cleaned schools and minded her own business. Miss Loretta stood slowly, her hand steady as she approached the microphone. The room fell silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of the grocery store, but the respectful quiet of people ready to listen. 53 years ago, I came home from Vietnam, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. I expected to be welcomed. I expected to be thanked. I expected to be seen as the Marine I'd proven myself to be. She paused, looking out at the faces staring back at her. Young and old, black and white, veterans and civilians, all waiting to hear what she'd learned in more than half a century of being invisible. Instead, I learned to make myself small. I learned to keep my service quiet. I learned that my uniform meant nothing to people who'd already decided what I was worth based on what I looked like. The crowd remained silent, hanging on every word. 3 weeks ago, I was humiliated in a grocery store where I'd been shopping for 30 years. My belongings were dumped on the floor like garbage. I was treated like a criminal for the crime of being old and black and taking my time to compare prices. Now, she had their complete attention. City council members leaned forward. The mayor's eyes never left her face. But something good came from that terrible day. People started talking. People started asking questions. People started wondering how many other veterans, how many other elders, how many other citizens are treated with disrespect simply because of what they look like. Miss Loretta reached into her handbag, the same handbag that had caused all the trouble, and pulled out a thick folder. I'm here today to propose the Dignity Initiative, a city-wide program that will ensure what happened to me never happens to anyone else. Mandatory bias training for all businesses that want city contracts. A veterans recognition program that honors service regardless of race or gender. And an elder respect campaign that reminds everyone that the person you're dismissing might be someone who helped build the community you're living in. The room erupted in applause. Veterans stood and saluted. Community leaders nodded their approval. Even the reporters in the back seemed moved by her words. But Miss Loretta wasn't finished. I'm also donating $50,000 of my own money to start a scholarship fund for young people who want to serve their country. Because the next generation needs to know that service comes in all colors, all ages, and all backgrounds. The $50,000 was part of the settlement from her lawsuit against Savamart. Money she could have kept for herself, but chose to give away instead. Because that's what Marines do. They serve something bigger than themselves. 1 year later, Mobile, Alabama had become a model for the rest of the country. The Dignity Initiative had been adopted by over 200 businesses, and discrimination complaints had dropped by 60%. The Veterans Recognition Program had identified and honored 127 previously unknown service members living in the city. And the Elder Respect campaign had changed the way an entire generation talked to their grandparents. But the changes went deeper than statistics and programs. Savamart had been transformed from the ground up. The store where Miss Loretta had been humiliated now featured a wall of honor, displaying photos and stories of local veterans. The company's new diversity training program was being studied by businesses across the South. And every employee wore a pin that read Dignity First, a reminder that every customer deserved respect, regardless of what they looked like. Miss Loretta had become reluctant famous, but she learned to use her platform wisely. She spoke at military academies about the importance of recognizing all who serve. She visited schools to teach young people about the hidden heroes in their own communities. She testified before Congress about the need for better support for elderly veterans. I never wanted to be a civil rights leader, she told a packed auditorium at the University of Alabama. I just wanted to buy groceries without being treated like a criminal. But sometimes life chooses your battles for you. The scholarship fund she'd started had grown to over $300,000, thanks to donations from across the country. 12 young people had already received full scholarships to military academies or colleges. Each recipient had to write an essay about dignity, respect, and service, values that Miss Loretta had embodied long before the world knew her name. Robert Mitchell, The Vietnam veteran who'd stood up for her in the store had become an unlikely friend. They met for coffee every Tuesday morning, sharing stories about their service and their hopes for the future. "You know what I learned from watching you handle that situation?" Robert asked during one of their weekly meetings. "I learned that real courage isn't about fighting enemies overseas. It's about standing up for yourself when everyone around you thinks you don't matter." Miss Loretta smiled, stirring sugar into her coffee. "I learned something too. I learned that keeping quiet doesn't protect you from anything. It just makes you invisible." The Bronze Star display case in Savamart had become an unexpected tourist attraction. Visitors from across the country stopped by to see where the viral video had been recorded and to read the plaque that told Miss Loretta's story. The store donated all proceeds from the gift shop to the scholarship fund. But perhaps the most important change was in the hearts and minds of the people who'd witnessed Miss Loretta's transformation. Children who'd seen the video asked their parents about the elderly people in their own lives. Teenagers volunteered at nursing homes and veteran centers. Adults started conversations with older neighbors they'd never spoken to before. Miss Loretta had wanted to buy bread and oatmeal. Instead, she'd given her community something far more valuable: the knowledge that everyone has a story worth respecting and every person deserves to be treated with dignity. Her legacy wasn't just in the programs and policies that bore her name. It was in the changed hearts of everyone who'd learned to look beyond appearances and see the heroes hiding in plain sight. The lesson of Miss Loretta Jenkins isn't complicated, but it's one that most people never learn until it's too late. You never know who someone really is until you're forced to see them, really see them, for who they've always been. Think about the people you pass every day. The elderly woman counting coupons at the grocery store. The quiet man sitting alone at the bus stop. The tired-looking janitor mopping floors after everyone else has gone home. How many of them have stories that would change the way you see the world? Miss Loretta spent 50 years being invisible, not because she wanted to be, but because society had decided she wasn't worth seeing. She was too old, too quiet, too different from what people expected a war hero to look like. So she folded her uniform, tucked away her medals, and learned to live in the shadows of her own life. But here's what Marcus Williams and Brittany Matthews and everyone else who judged her didn't understand. Heroism doesn't have an expiration date. Service doesn't fade with age. And dignity isn't something you lose just because other people refuse to recognize it. The Bronze Star in Miss Loretta's handbag wasn't just a piece of metal. It was proof that she'd stood up under enemy fire to save lives. It was evidence that she'd served her country with honor when serving meant facing discrimination from the very people she was protecting. It was a reminder that courage comes in all colors, all ages, and all backgrounds. But she shouldn't have needed to prove any of that to buy groceries. Every day, in stores and restaurants and offices across America, people are making judgments about each other based on nothing more than appearance. Every day, someone's dignity is being stripped away because they don't fit into the neat little boxes that make other people comfortable. The truth is, we're all carrying invisible uniforms. We're all veterans of battles that other people can't see. We're all heroes of stories that haven't been told yet. Miss Loretta's story went viral because people recognized something in it, either the pain of being misjudged or the shame of being the one doing the judging. Her experience wasn't unique. It was universal, and that's what made it so powerful. But the real message isn't about what happened to Miss Loretta. It's about what happens next. It's about the choice each of us makes when we encounter someone who doesn't fit our expectations. Do we judge, or do we look closer? Do we dismiss, or do we engage? Do we assume, or do we ask questions? The teenagers who watched Miss Loretta's video and started volunteering at veteran centers learned something their parents' generation is still figuring out. Respect isn't earned through grand gestures or obvious achievements. It's given freely as a basic human right to every person we meet. The business owners who implemented dignity training after Miss Loretta's story broke discovered that treating customers with respect isn't just good ethics, it's good business. When people feel valued, they become loyal. When they feel respected, they spread the word. And the veterans who came forward to share their own stories of being overlooked or dismissed found that visibility brings its own kind of healing. Miss Loretta's courage to speak out gave them permission to speak up too. If you take one thing from Miss Loretta's story, let it be this: everyone you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about. Everyone you encounter has earned their place in the world through struggles you can't imagine. Everyone deserves to be treated with the dignity that Miss Loretta had to fight to receive. The question isn't whether you'll meet heroes in your daily life. The question is whether you'll recognize them when you do. 2 years after the incident that changed her life, Miss Loretta Jenkins walked through the automatic doors of Savamart, carrying the same floral handbag and wearing the same quiet smile. But everything else was different. The first thing she noticed was the wall of honor near the entrance, featuring photos and stories of local veterans. Her own picture was there, of course, but so were dozens of others, men and women of all ages and backgrounds who'd served their country in ways both big and small. "Good morning, Miss Jenkins," called out the new store manager, a young black woman named Angela who'd been hired as part of Savamart's commitment to diversity. "How are you doing today?" "Just fine, dear," Miss Loretta replied, the same words she'd been saying for 76 years. But now when she said them, people actually listened. She made her way to the produce section, where she still bought the same simple groceries: bread, oatmeal, a few vegetables for the week. But now other customers nodded respectfully as she passed. A teenage boy helped her reach something on a high shelf. An elderly white woman struck up a conversation about the weather. At the checkout counter, the cashier, a young man with kind eyes and a dignity first pin on his uniform, rang up her purchases with care. "Thank you for your service, Miss Jenkins," he said as he handed her the receipt. Miss Loretta nodded graciously, but her mind was already moving on to the next part of her day. She had a speaking engagement at the local high school, where she talked to students about the importance of looking beyond appearances. After that, she'd meet with the city council to discuss expanding the Dignity Initiative to neighboring towns. As she walked back toward the exit, she passed a bronze star display case that had become something of a shrine. Today, there was a young black girl standing in front of it, maybe 8 years old, reading the plaque that told Miss Loretta's story. "Grandma," the girl said to the woman beside her. "Was she really a Marine?" "Yes, baby," the grandmother replied. "She was a Marine and a hero, and an example of what happens when good people stand up for what's right." Miss Loretta paused, remembering another little girl who'd once dreamed of serving her country, back when such dreams seemed impossible for someone who looked like her. "Excuse me," she said softly, approaching the child. "Are you interested in the military?" The girl's eyes went wide. "Are you her? Are you the lady in the picture?" Miss Loretta smiled. "I am. And what's your name?" "Jasmine," the girl said shyly. "I want to be a Marine too when I grow up." "Well, Jasmine, let me tell you something important. Being a Marine isn't about being the strongest or the fastest or the loudest. It's about serving something bigger than yourself. It's about standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. And it's about treating everyone with dignity, even when they don't treat you the same way." The girl nodded solemnly, absorbing every word. "Can I ask you something, Jasmine?" "Yes, ma'am. If you saw someone being treated unfairly, what would you do?" Jasmine thought for a moment. "I'd stand up for them, like you did." Miss Loretta's heart swelled with pride. Not pride in her own story, but pride in the next generation that was learning to see beyond the surface, to recognize the heroes hiding in plain sight. "That's exactly right," she said. "And that's how we change the world, one person at a time, one act of dignity at a time." As Miss Loretta walked out of Savamart that day, she carried with her the same floral handbag that had started it all. But now it held something new alongside her carefully folded uniform. Hope for a future where everyone would be judged by their character, not their appearance. The automatic doors closed behind her, and Miss Loretta Jenkins, war hero, civil rights advocate, an ordinary woman who'd done extraordinary things, headed home to prepare for whatever battle tomorrow might bring. Because that's what Marines do. They serve, they protect, and they never stop fighting for what's right.